Perfect. So, thank you, Duncan, for coming on the show. What's being an independent documentary filmmaker's life like? I'm just like curious to know.
Oh, well, these days, like everyone else who have to navigate through the pandemic, it's challenging to say the least. But prior to the pandemic, there's gradation of challenges. Being an indie filmmaker in the U.S. Have been a uphill battle all along, and with a lot of the evolution of the streaming platform and the consolidations of productions and programming. Indie filmmakers, especially if you were a independent producers, there are things that were shifting quite a bit in terms of available resources and capacity for collaborations and access to projects, and that translates for a lot of people the obstacles for difficulties in obtaining financing. So there's a lot of navigation and reshifting focus, and how do you still compose projects and creative work and maintain integrity to the extent that you're working with a changing industry and an ecosystem. So for myself, it's very similar, but heading into the current project that I have right now, I knew full front and center that I needed to manage very limited resources. So I was already working in that pretense and the limitations. So even though I had to make adjustments in the pandemic, it wasn't as drastic as some of the folks that I've seen, my peers. So it continued to be challenging. It's uh, it's a regression in terms of available resources. Nevertheless, I think that may be an opportunity, for someone like me, and I'm certainly, very active in seeking that um, viability and potential, is to look at new ways of doing things. Okay, well, we
Right.
don't have access to certain things. We don't have as much financing available in the conventional sense. So what do we do? And that becomes part of the creative process. So that in itself, it's frustrating and exciting, and in a lot of ways, it challenges you. For myself, I like that challenge, so I embrace it. For better or worse.
Right. Right. I mean, and you have been doing this also like for the past what, like 15 years. So, how has the sort of indie film industry, or not? I shouldn't be actually calling it an industry, but the indie film scene
Mhm.
changed over the sort of past decade? I mean, are we seeing with like OTT platforms and other online streaming platforms more content, more like quality content coming out,
There,
or
yeah,
are
there's certainly a lot more content available and more accelerated content productions. And with the different platforms, there are new access to distribution that wasn't available more than a decade ago. I think things started to really shift back in, I would say, between 2013 and 2016. There was a lot of just renegotiation and resetting from the conventional distribution model to what we're seeing, and it's still an evolution. It's still emerging, but you have players, industry stakeholders that are now getting a foothold, and the framework and the parameters are much more compatible to old cable network um, strategies. So
right,
for the independent producers and the filmmakers, unless you already have an established relationship with the various production companies that may be doing co-productions with some of these entities, you may have difficulties, gaining access. So a lot of folks are doing more purely independent projects away from these conventional models. I mean, Netflix, Amazon, and the likes now, they are the now conventional model
Right.
of film production and television production. And a lot of the more established cable networks, they're shifting their business model to be more like Netflix, to
Right.
be more like Amazon. And it's similar to the studios. I mean, recently, as you're probably aware, Warner Brothers uh, really invested quite a bit of time and money into launching HBO Max, and then during the pandemic, releasing what should have been conventionally theatrical releases. So
Right.
so the so that a lot of these models are still shifting. So for myself, and I can't speak on behalf of a lot of folks out there. I know folks struggle on different radiation. I'm the type who just wants who just can't take no for an answer. I'm just going to do it one way or the other. It doesn't matter. What changes. If I have a commitment to something, I'm going to find a way to do it, right? I think that's probably to my own detriment and also to my own advantage. Sometimes I'm not chasing festivals. I'm not chasing recognitions in terms of laurels and awards and things like that. So I am not as tied to that connectivity through the conventional model. Where most folks are, they need to build up the credentials for this and that, and then uh, I mean, credits is the valuable currency in Hollywood, right?
Right.
And then even and that's very true for indies. Even though that most independent people like to declare themselves as independent, but um, in
Yeah.
reality, in all practicality, they are not.
Right.
They're very limited number of people who are truly independent
And is this
out there.
because when they decide to partner up with an online streaming service like a Hulu or a Netflix, is there some kind of an content oversight that is then put on the independent filmmakers,
Hmm.
or is it
Hmm.
more of a self censorship, like what might sell,
Yeah,
what what might
it's
be more suited to these like platforms, like or like is it both?
correct. Correct. It's definitely a combination of these things.
Right.
So a lot of the analysis that you may consider before you even try to develop fully your creative project. Oftentimes, even though that people tell themselves they don't want to do that, or they try not to do it, but 9 times out of 10 or 10 times out of 10, they're looking at, well, these are similar projects on Netflix or on Amazon, or whoever the final distribution platform may be appealing to you, and I want to I think there's a deliberation. For me, it's a little different. For a lot of folks, they want the world to see their creative work.
Right.
So by whatever means, right? I'm going to formulate, and then a lot of times it's a compromise. It's so their prescribed content acceptance that rides the trends of what is deemed to have value to maintain subscribership, right? So
Right.
that's that is a big piece of the business model right now. And we know, because of what happened with the pandemic, with a lot of theaters all around the world closing. Especially in our neck of the woods in North America, right? We were sort of the prominent gold stamp, uh, where everyone, looks to the U.S. as the quote unquote, ultimate, authority and approval, right? You see that in award shows. There's more attempt to diversify and to be inclusive, but
Right.
and I'm going to be completely, frank and honest, but so much of that seems to me very apparent on a facade level. It's there's something lacking to the sincerity of that approach. It's almost like, oh, the world's watching us. Now we have to have diversity.
Right.
Instead of looking at, well, what is the balance and the reconciliation between business, creativity, integrity, of treating people who are, part of that creativity, as well as perhaps recognizing, not just as a reactive mass, critical mass response to what seemingly is acceptable from an audience.
Right.
And we have done too much of that, and that's been the rhythm of media to begin with, right? It's not new.
Right.
So the new platform in terms of distribution, they reflect that, they adopt that. So the more time goes on, the more corporate, in regards to that approach that they adopt. I'm not um, uh, presenting an argument against corporations. I think there are ways that we balance, what, how you have a corporate body and still could do very good things. But oftentimes it's reverts back to the same prescribed formulas, as you see in other industries, right?
Right.
It's all about, in order for us to be deemed successful, we have to have certain things that would have a perceived value that people want to give us money for. There's not, at the end of the day, what is the real exchange of value? That's very questionable.
Correct. Right. Yeah. Makes sense. Makes sense. I mean, it's definitely, where do you sort of draw that balance between like independent work versus like corporate, influence, right? Like that's the sort of it's the sort of million dollar question, right? So I just want to come back really like quickly to your project that you sort of mentioned earlier as well, which was one paycheck away, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I believe that this is the project that you have been working on
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
over the past year or so. So, like, tell us
Mm-hmm.
sort of
Mm-hmm.
a little more about this project. What drove you to, investigate this process? What drove you to try and capture the realities and the experiences of everyday middle class Americans, and on your like website you like mentioned that about 80% of the total population live paycheck to paycheck. That's an astounding 260 million people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how did you come up or come across this like number? What sort of drove you to investigate this further?
Right, right. Well, I've spent a number of years working with various economic community development initiatives, as well as what has been policy related issues to these initiatives, and a lot of the activities were broadened to include critical infrastructure to natural resource management, and I was fortunate to be involved in um, a diverse set of communities and organizations and individuals throughout the country,
Right.
and gained a lot of insights in addition to observing the perceived benefit and values that were supposed to be uh, connected and distributed as part of these efforts. A long story short, I would say that all of those efforts, despite initial conveyance of good intention. There are times that there were policies and different public and private partnerships that who came together, and supposedly the framework was to try to solve a problem that was adversely affecting a community or broader region. It could be economic, it could be a combination of economic and natural disaster,
Okay.
or health related, or access to critical infrastructure that is lacking, that prevents perceived opportunities to be uh, accessible or accomplished.
Now, this role, was it like through the sort of government, like, or was
Yeah,
it some?
a lot of these were through local, state, federal, and tribal governments as well. So, and oftentimes, a lot of the projects I were involved in had a combinations of these entities, in addition to private entities and community members. So they had a varying complexity and issues at hand, but what they had in common was the attempt to solve issues for a population. Um, what turns out to be the outcome for most of these were very convoluted, um, very half-assed attempts to bring um, solutions and potential to the real problems at hand. It's just okay. We're just going to do the minimum, get some recognition, and then maybe have perceived notions of value and benefit we offer, and then it could turn into a ribbon cutting or a pat on the back or newspaper coverage. Everyone having a good, a congratulatory pat on the back, that type of stuff. And
Curious to know
oftentimes,
what would be an, sorry, curious to know, but what would be like an half-assed approach to a sort of complex problem such as
sure.
poverty, or sort of lack of
Yeah, and
sort of
it's not
financial
even, I
support.
mean, going to sort of the pathway to why I'm doing the project.
Right.
I realized that a lot of the folks who were, affected were not just, as you mentioned, maybe poverty is a problem that a lot of people pay attention to and want to bring resolutions to. A lot of these efforts that I was involved in, even though there were, part of the demographics who were experiencing poverty, um, or the lack of access to resources, the majority of the population were working and middle class. And oftentimes, you would have folks who were considered to be the upper middle class. Um,
Okay.
Often, it is the working class who are the most affected because they don't have the um, the headspace to move up and down the class stratification um, that is already embedded for people who may already be in the poverty level, right? Because you can't get any lower, right? So if there are things that happen to you, you could perhaps improve at least on a temporary basis. The working class folks were over this time, and I didn't realize this phenomenon almost a decade ago when I was involved in certain activities. Right, I was doing film projects, but not in the same vein as I'm doing them right now. It was more along with narrative productions, fiction productions, and I was involved in incentives, policy making for the film industry, developing film studios and things like that.
Right.
Um, but the economic and community activities I was involved in were supposed to bring heightened values to improve the quality of life of these individuals and regions.
Okay.
Um, and it didn't. It, it, it permitted a false sense of heightened opportunity and prosperity, and then it was left alone, and it went dormant, and then you could see that things start to regress on different levels. And so fast forward uh, to a couple of years ago, I was invited to uh, develop and produce a short documentary on food insecurity issues. So I dust off a lot of my notes, a lot of my memories, and I use some of the elements that I observed and gained experience from, and did that project. And it was in that project that I coordinated with various stakeholders through different organizations that were involved in the food insecurity hunger equation. And I brought up the issue of one paycheck away. Because oftentimes, as a lot of people perceive, when someone is experiencing hunger or food insecurity, the first thing they think of, oh, these people are impoverished, they live, in poverty. And in my presentation, it was demonstrated that wasn't the case, and it was increasingly not the case. Even a lot of the stakeholders who would focus previously on more of that demographic, the demographic who were impoverished and in poverty, they are now seeing more participants, more people needing help who were college students, teachers, nurses, your regular folks,
Right.
right? Um, so with that, I went on to different things, and it was back in around the time just before the winter of 2019. It was around like November and December of 2018. That I ran into some folks, who saw some of my previous work, and they remember the Hunger Project, and they asked me if I had further developed any content or actions, related to that project, and they were, especially interested in the one paycheck away phenomenon. They were also very surprised when they saw that so many people who were not living in poverty were needing help,
Right.
or
No.
not, being able to, have means to just uh, satisfying the basic needs, like, having food on the table.
Right.
Uh, so it rekindled something that perhaps I was unconsciously trying to bury, because of my own jadedness.
Right.
And then we could certainly, bring some of those cases back up. I'm pretty, an open book, and I'll tell you anything. But anyways, I started to do research about what's going on, within the greater economy in the U.S. So I saw on several different occasions initially about that 80% of people in the U.S. were living in paycheck. I just kept thinking that that's just fake news. Maybe it's exaggerated. And then I started to find that, it was, referenced and studied and analyzed by people like Robert Reich, who was the former Secretary of Labor under the Clinton administration. He's still a professor and a researcher in Berkeley. And he's done, quite a bit of work on inequality. And it wasn't just him, who was studying this, who were analyzing it. So I started to do almost 3 months of research, with the notion in the back of my mind, okay, there's something else going on. This cannot be the real number. Uh, Unfortunately, through my own research and what I could find, throughout that period, it validated that indeed that was the case. It is about 260 million people in the US living paycheck to paycheck. And the very scary thing about that, too, is that a significant percentage of those people do not realize that they are. They do not realize that they're one tiny step away from having what they perceive to be security and stability in their lives coming undone.
Right. I mean, that in itself, I mean, there are a sort of couple of points in like what you said that actually took me by like surprise. So when when sort of people, when sort of laymen, like people like me talk about, people living paycheck to paycheck, you usually think about, as you said, like people who are not necessarily living in poverty, but are very close to that sort of lifestyle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you said about people not having the necessary headspace, is what does that mean? Is that necessary? Does that mean that people don't have the necessary financial education and like background, or is it is it that they are unable to plan for themselves financially, or they're unable to adapt themselves to a sort of market that, or to adapt themselves and enable themselves with sort of better skills to position themselves better in the job market.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what, like when we say headspace, like what
Mm-hmm.
do we mean? And then the other part of that is you also mentioned that a small percentage of these people living paycheck to paycheck were actually upper middle class, right? They were like students, nurses,
Mm-hmm.
workmen, technician,
Mm-hmm.
etc. So, like, what exactly is this phenomenon? Because I'm not able to entirely wrap my head around it, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's not easy to wrap your head around it, and somewhat is a it's a phenomenon that didn't happen overnight, and that's what I realized. What how you were just asking questions were indeed very similar to my own discovery process. So and the headspace that I mentioned. Um, that demographic that I mentioned to you that's unable to not get through that headspace because it's so limited and it squeezes their quality of life and existence. Um, the United Way, which is a big nonprofit here in the United States. They're in every single one of the states. They do a lot of community work. They started to study this several years ago, and I believe, and I could be remembering incorrectly. I think there are a dozen states that had contributed data. And I remember, when I first, conceived this project and wanted to pursue it, one of the first stops that I made was United Way in the state of Louisiana. At that meeting, they provided me with their research material, and there is a demographic that they describe, as I was describing to you, called ALICE, and the acronym stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, and the last thing, the E, Educated. What we perceive the working class to be previously were, these may not be people who are living in poverty, but they're probably not educated. That's not true. These are educated folks
Right.
in the US. And that percentage of the demographic has grown significantly over the last decade. And it wasn't because people were coming out of poverty. I mean, there was a little bit, right? And a tiny percentage. What happened is that the middle class demographic is starting to fall into that Alice demographics, what we used to think as the working class. So there's a very thin line. And now the headspace for the working, that the Alice demographics, that working class group, they're unable to go back up to the middle class spectrum. So in some way, when we're looking at 80% of people in the US living paycheck to paycheck, it's easy to do the math. When you look at things that way, it started to make sense to me at that point, right? But what you were just asking too, that do people understand what's happening to them, or if they're getting a recognition of it, are they able to do something about it? Oftentimes, they are not, or have very limited access to opportunities to do that. And there is something else that's going on, right? And that would be the logical question to ask. And so it took me a little time to come to terms with that, as I was developing the project. And then I knew that I did not want to pursue this from a top-down commentary level, i.e., with a lot of nonfiction, documentaries that may want to address some of these issues. Well, the first thing to do is go and get some experts, right? We have a lot of material available to us already, from experts, in the forms of research and things like that. And I've worked with a lot of policymakers, so I know how to navigate, through that infrastructure. And I knew that if I were to do that, the likelihood is that we'll probably come up with the same assumptions and same type of articulation about the issues, and we're not going to have any viable solutions, and that's not what I wanted. So that's when I decided that One Paycheck Away is a metaphor for the average person, and it's going to be different, for different individuals, obviously. So I was fortunate enough to get to be introduced to certain characters who are now, key characters of the film. So they range from working class folks, as we perceive a working class person is, to a couple of the anchor key characters. They are very much middle class. We also have upper middle class individuals that experiences a life-changing situation and something changed. So they are also not as secure as they think they are. And in the U.S., and maybe it's similar in Canada, and certainly in some places in the EU. And I know I spent some time in Dublin and Ireland in 2019, so I got to observe and meet with some folks. So I saw some similar patterns there, because of how we approach commerce and how we shape industries, and then how we change the composites of so many of our communities. And, one of the key issue in the film itself is the theme of displacement. And a lot of the displacement have occurred as a result and an effect of gentrification in the U.S. And in 2020, with the pandemic, there is a new, maybe a refresh phenomenon with gentrification that's happening. It's no longer unique and confined to urban centers. We are now gentrifying the fringes of suburbia. We're gentrifying rural America, And that is a very concerning uh, cultural phenomenon that is unfolding. So there are a lot of complex issues at play. So for the individual, whether you're working class, middle class, upper middle class, it's hard to wrap your head around, and let alone try to do something about it. So the key characters in the film, they have all experienced um, obstacles and navigations within the status quo systems, and they try to adapt to methodologies that are prescribed in the status quo, and they have reached a point where that is no longer a viable option for them. They have to change and they have to do something. So that's where the breakaway, and going back to the headspace, they're going to have to find a way to break through that headspace.
Right. Now, you sort of mentioned these like characters whose lives and decisions you the sort of documentary follows. Now, was there a sort of particular type of demographic that you were attempting to approach, or were they of a particular geographical location, of belonging to a certain ethnical background, like what how did you decide on which characters to sort of portray through the sort of documentaries, and also where in your experience were people willing to sort of share their lives, their decisions, and their struggles, on the camera? How was that journey like?
Yeah, absolutely. And I spent a lot of time up front, as I was doing research and validating information and data and going through, stats. So, I was fortunate that, throughout the years, I've connected with a lot of different folks, who were in different disciplines. So through communications with them, and talking to them about what I'm up to, and even though that I didn't have a definitive prescribe, it's unlike doing a fiction project. Even then, you shift based on what you find, and so that's how I work too. But especially with this, from the onset, I knew that I have to put my assumptions aside,
Right.
and be very open. So I talked to probably over 100 people up front who were potential characters in different parts of the country. Um, and I was fortunate that because of my connections in Louisiana, I was lucky to find a key character that embraced and still embraces so much of what the movie, the film, and the tonality of the issues may be trying to convey. So I have a key character in Louisiana who is a seemingly successful professional. Grew up in the state just outside of New Orleans, in a middle class family. She's also African American, um, and she has a lot of connections to local communities, policymakers, as well as on the state and national level. She is the housing guru of the state of Louisiana, and well respected and recognized, on the national agenda as well. Um, it's sort of ironic that I connected with her because my own personal perspective and position were so jaded by policy making, by anything that has to do with government initiatives. Um, and somehow I connected with this person who is still placing so much trust, but she's very honest in her approach about the shortcomings of a lot of these things. Despite that, she still has a very embedded trust in that process. She still believes that policy making is an effective way to deal with a lot of these socio-economic issues that we're familiar with. So there's a little bit of reconciliation between me and her, as part of the project. And so I have to defer to her to articulate through her personal experience. So a lot of the times when we, before the lockdowns and things like that, I would be on location and actually be with her, on several days, and she goes from event to event, and her interactions, and with folks, and I observe and I capture, all of that, and what in the documentary world, that style is called verite, right? So it's not, interviews or, so you're actually in action with these people, and I've been able to do that with several of our characters. And I'm hoping that when we have a window again post the risk of the current pandemic, that we further that, because I think it's through that we realize that, wow, what this person is experiencing is very similar to what you and I might have gone through in different situations, right? Even though that we might have a different profession or different occupation, and then perhaps through that is where some of the indication of solutions may come from. So with that said, she's also been burned by the status quo, on many different situations. And you may be aware that back in 2005, 2005, that's when Katrina hit the state of Louisiana, and that's completely devastated the territory. And 15 years later, they're still not recovered. I mean, environmentally, economically, and anything and everything in between, and they continue to be exposed to a lot of issues, on an exaggerated level. So I was fortunate to have the opportunity to engage in that place and with these people. So I'm also able, through those connections, bring out how humanity, us as human beings, relate to our natural world, because of some of these conditions that are already embedded in a place like that. So that's how the project is evolving. How some of these characters are coming to light, and it's fascinating, to learn about not only about the navigation of how one handles different challenges in life or taking opportunities, and how do you maintain a form of a sense of resiliency. How do you keep going, right? So each one of these characters have elements of that. So and I'll disclose this right now, which will be a big part of the film. I also had a sort of supporting cast, to these main characters. So there's a couple who was in the supporting cast dimension that, I wanted to show the context. They are middle class and they do certain things and they help communities in certain efforts, and little things happen here and there, and they're okay, right? So for the most part, that's a lot of people in the U.S. They don't pay a whole lot of attention, even though that they may be engaged in certain things, and then bang, A week ago, the husband had his leg amputated below his knee. Life changing occasion for both him and her. Just like that. They both had decent jobs, a home that they bought. So,
And now
and that
all
could
of a sudden,
happen to any one of us.
right? And now all of a sudden, uh, they would need to think about, oh, what the sort of finances look like? How do we like manage our, how do we maintain our lifestyle? Is there a need to downgrade, and all these other decisions then have now like need to be taken, which were not even considered before, right? So like that. And have you also explored like themes of like mental health and things like that? Because oftentimes, and this is what we just read in sort of common like literature as well. Oftentimes, mental health issues, things like anxiety, depression, and other serious issues, are
Mm-hmm.
closely correlated with the sort of uncertainty when it comes to like financial matters, right? So, is that something
Mm-hmm.
that your film explores as well?
Oh, absolutely. I think it was initially how I perceived it, knowing that, I had to be flexible and observe and allow phenomenon to unfold through the lens and the direct experiences of these individuals. And several of them have gone through that situation, where their mental health was affected. Um, and it's a thin line between what perhaps seemingly on the surface level triggered by a financial situation and what was already something else that is not only in our individual psyche but our collective psyche as a culture. And that's what is the scary part of this. So as I was watching some of these things unfold and then heading into the pandemic, I realized that so much of what I'm watching is a walking nightmare. It's almost like a real horror story. And the fear is connected in a lot of these individuals who are strangers to one another. And yeah, the economics and the financial part of it, it's a critical articulation, but I'm starting to see what is behind it. And that to me is scary because a lot of people, as you mentioned a little earlier, how do we wrap our heads around this, right? And it may be that we don't. And if we don't, then how do we adjust to face it, in a way? It's almost like, realizing we have a trauma we need to face up to. Either we turn the other way, right? Just go turn on Netflix and watch Tiger King or whatever people watch, right? Um, uh, Although for a lot of people, I have a buddy who was from the state of Alabama. He left some years ago. He was part of the cohort, with a lot of his friends and families. He knew and still knows, who stayed, within the community where they grew up, went to school. They're educated, university educated, smart people. Um, the only means for them to make a living was to get a quasi skilled job with a manufacturer or a factory or some vertical chain company that's oftentimes part of the automotive industry, or some tech production company. Um, and in that neck of the woods, you're lucky if you got paid $9 an hour. So how do you really sustain a way of living? I think most people just give up along the way, and that's why you see a lot of substance abuse. Many people turn to something that could numb them. If I'm numb, I'm not going to have to realize that I have these things that I need to face up to and try to solve. He was fortunate enough to get out, but it was at the expense of a lot of different things, and going through substance abuse himself. And these are not, your marginalized people to begin with. They didn't come from poverty, right? So I think, especially for younger folks now, we no longer have that preconceived notion that there is this upward mobility. You go from, this type of level of job, and then you get more money, and it's, I mean, all of that is coming undone. There's something going on, um, that is informing us, such as, what I like to, look back to 2020 is, all the things, phenomenon that it unfolded, that it exposed, very much similar to, in some ways, what Hurricane Katrina did to Louisiana. It exposed a lot of the adverse, negative issues that were already part of that society that we didn't want to pay attention to. And 2020 in the US did that. And unfortunately, I'm seeing the same pattern of complacency, that we are not facing it front and center. I don't, and maybe you could inform me about some of the things in Canada, in your neck of the woods. Love to learn more about it too. But I hear different things from different parts of the world.
Yeah, that is the sort of stark reality, right? Like, so, I for one am really, really looking forward, and I'm super excited to watch the sort of documentary when it comes out. For my viewers and listeners, the link to One Paycheck Away is in the description below. So feel free
Thank
to
you.
click on it, check it out. And are there any has these the sort of potential release dates been something that sort of you can share with our viewers, and I'm sure a lot of them will
Yeah,
be looking
it,
forward to it.
it's hard to pinpoint, an absolute release date because of the ongoing phenomena of the pandemic, and what we want to pursue as part of the next stage of production with our characters. We really need to be on site, on location with them, as their lives change, and how they're shifting, and we want the film itself at the end of the day, that the audience is seeing a semblance of solution that they can relate to. Just pounding on problems after problems. Yeah, we know what the problems are,
Right.
right? Um, it's more, my interest, my intention to find a way that the audience, who's viewing the film itself, wants to participate. I want people to ask relevant questions, after they watch this, or have some semblance of, hey, I could take a step for myself to do X. Um, so with that said, realizing that there may be opportunities to release, at least, um, some content, we're looking at maybe producing, parts of the story in shorts,
Right.
and then releasing them online for free, for free viewing. And that's, been my approach too. Working with limited resources, being careful, not to adhere or being caught in the conventional model of chasing the dollar. So it's like, okay, oh, well, I have people come to me and say, oh, you should talk to so and so, there's a grant, and then I do a little bit of digging around. Well, that organization really isn't compatible with some of the things that we're conveying. They may be offended, and then they're going to say, hey, maybe you guys need to tone this down a little bit. No.
You'll have to give up
So
on your
this really,
independence.
yeah, I have to ensure that this project is not a one-off entertainment driven type of initiative. I don't need to do that. I don't need to waste anyone who wants to watch this time to do that.
Right.
So I want this to have a continuity. I envision that from this, there are issues that would be unresolved, that we all deem critical and important for us to find solutions to. I want to take those elements and develop related projects to this film and have more and more people participate, not only in the US, but worldwide, because a lot of these issues are not uncommon in different parts of the world. Is that the US right now has a lot, that's being exposed, and we are probably the most complacent in the world in not wanting to solve it.
Right. Right. Makes sense. I mean, we will definitely be on the sort of lookout for the shorts when they release, and and keep a sort of close eye on the sort of website for further updates.
Yeah, yeah.
We are at time. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. This was amazing, and you actually educated me and our viewers on so many things that are actually affecting society. Right? I had no idea about the sort of middle class aspect of it, that the Alice concept, right, and so many other serious stuff that's actually impacting our populace, right, and
right,
almost affecting 260 million people. That is
yeah.
a humongous number. I mean, when I first read that, I was astounded. So,
I
thank you.
Yeah. The truth was that I didn't believe it when I saw it.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
and I welcome, we welcome commentaries, people who want to share their stories. If you go on our webpage, we actually have a community page where there are a lot of community stories that people have shared. So, it's from that we could, begin to create the fabric of, what, may be viable solutions for a lot of people. So please share,
Yes.
Please do talk about it, think about it, act on it, reach out to us, question it.
For sure. And with that, thank you, Duncan, and
Thank you.
we will be on the sort of lookout for further details. Thank you.
Yeah, be well. Have a good evening.
You too. Thanks.
Thank you.